Have you ever wondered why, after all those years of schooling, no one ever taught you how to live? How to think for yourself? How to understand who you are, or what it means to be truly free? You are told what to memorize, what to repeat, what to fear, and when to raise your hand. From your first day in the classroom, you weren't being educated, you were being domesticated. 12 years in a system that teaches compliance over creativity, grades over curiosity, obedience over inner truth. You weren't taught to ask questions that disrupt. You were trained to give answers that please. You weren't encouraged to discover your soul. You were prepared to become a cog. Sit still. Don't speak out. Follow instructions. Don't trust your own mind, trust the test. You were praised for remembering what others told you, punished for imagining what they didn't. And somewhere along the way, you stopped wondering who you were, because the system already decided what you should become. But what if the very idea of education you were raised with was never about awakening you, but about shaping you into something useful for someone else? What if you were never taught how to think, only how to perform? Not how to feel, only how to function. Not how to become free, but how to be efficient, compliant, and silent. Michel Foucault once said that modern institutions, including schools, are not neutral spaces. They are technologies of power, factories that mold identity, architectures of control. And Aldous Huxley warned of a future where we would come to love our servitude, where education would no longer be about enlightenment, but about training the mind to desire its own cage. So here's the real question. What kind of mind does this system produce? And more terrifying, what kind of soul does it erase? You spent years being shaped by people who never knew you, being evaluated by systems that never cared who you could become, being told that success meant fitting in, that excellence meant never stepping out of line, but conformity is not wisdom, and compliance is not freedom. So ask yourself, what part of you had to die so that the rest of you could succeed in this system? What wild, untamed questions were silenced in your mind, just so you could get the right answers? What dreams were reprogrammed into goals? What instincts were called wrong until you stopped trusting them? This isn't education. This is training, conditioning, a preparation not for life, but for utility. You were taught to be useful, not to be free. But what if that's the entire point? What if the greatest illusion of modern society is that education liberates? Stick around, because what we're about to uncover will change how you see your past, how you think about your mind, and what it truly means to break free. You were born with a mind wired for wonder, yet the first thing society taught you was how to suppress it. From the moment you entered that classroom, your curiosity wasn't nurtured, it was filtered. Not all questions were welcome, only the right ones, the safe ones, the ones that didn't disturb the lesson plan. You sat beneath flickering fluorescent lights while the world outside pulsed with mystery. And inside, you learned how to sit still, how to keep your eyes forward, how to only speak when spoken to. It seemed harmless on the surface, a place to learn, but underneath, something far more profound was happening. You weren't just being taught math or grammar. You were being taught who you were allowed to be. Michel Foucault called it the disciplinary society, a world where the architecture of control is invisible yet omnipresent, where classrooms mimic prisons and exams mimic surveillance, where the bell rings and you move, where authority is internalized until you no longer need to be watched because you've learned to police yourself. This isn't education, it's social conditioning. Foucault saw schools, hospitals, and factories as part of the same machinery, not to liberate the individual, but to normalize them, to turn the unpredictable soul into a predictable worker. And so, from childhood, you were trained to fear failure more than falsehood, to prioritize answers over understanding, to be more employable than alive. But what happens to a human being when their inner world is reduced to a resume? Carl Jung warned us of this fragmentation. He saw the soul as a wild force, mysterious, vast, irrational. And he knew that modern institutions were allergic to mystery. That society doesn't want wild forests. It wants trimmed hedges. It wants you tamed, pruned, marketable. So your soul was pushed underground. Your longing for meaning was replaced with the pursuit of achievement. Your individuality flattened into a persona. You stopped asking, "Who am I?" and started asking, "What do they want me to be?" And that's exactly what the system needed. Because a person who is self-possessed is hard to manipulate. But a person who is insecure, uncertain, disconnected from their inner voice, they are easy to mold, easy to sell to, easy to program. And this is where Huxley's prophecy begins to unfold. He didn't warn of a world ruled by brute force. He warned of one where people would love their own subjugation, where entertainment would replace truth, where pleasure would replace purpose, where the illusion of freedom would become the most effective form of control. In Brave New World, the masses don't rebel. They don't want to, because they've been trained to be satisfied with distraction. They've been educated just enough to be useful, but not enough to be dangerous. Just enough to operate the machinery, but not enough to question why the machinery exists. That's the hidden problem. You didn't lose your freedom in adulthood. You surrendered it. The moment you stopped questioning the curriculum. The moment you believed that a test score defined your worth. The moment you accepted that success meant climbing a ladder someone else built. The moment you let your soul be quieted by praise for performance. And you were rewarded, weren't you? Gold stars, honor rolls, approval. But at what cost? You became fluent in pleasing others and illiterate in your own inner language. You learned how to execute orders, but forgot how to hear the whisper of your own soul. This is not failure. This is design. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Because the education system wasn't broken. It was built this way, to train minds, to shape desires, to produce people who confuse obedience with intelligence and usefulness with value. But here's the terrifying part. When you are trained only to be useful, you start to believe that your worth is conditional, that you are only as valuable as your productivity. That rest is laziness. That questioning is rebellion. That self-exploration is selfish. And so, you suppress, you conform, you adapt. Until one day, you look in the mirror and see a face you don't fully recognize because the system succeeded. But what if you could begin to undo it? What if the greatest act of defiance is to remember the self they tried to erase? Let's go deeper, because the damage doesn't stop at the classroom door. It follows you into your career, your relationships, your self-worth. And it's time to expose the invisible chains that still shape your choices. You graduate, you move on. The school bell stops ringing, but something inside you still waits for permission to speak. The teacher is gone, but the voice in your head keeps grading you. Every time you rest, every time you slow down, every time you choose something unapproved, uncertain, or unproductive. This is the echo of your training. You think you've moved on, but the architecture of obedience lives on inside you, in the way you doubt your instincts, in the way you chase approval before authenticity, in the way you hesitate to live a life that doesn't fit the rubric. You were never taught how to be free, only how to perform. And now, even when no one is watching, you still perform. You become an adult, but still ask silently, am I doing it right? You mistake busyness for meaning. You mistake routine for security. You mistake comfort for fulfillment. Because the system didn't just train your mind, it rewired your desires. It taught you to fear failure more than emptiness, to strive even when you don't know why, to compare, to compete, to win whatever that means. And so you build a life, a job, a reputation, a carefully curated identity. But something is missing. Not something external, not something you can buy. Something quieter, a voice, a hunger, a memory of something you once were before the grades, the goals, the grind. That is the self you abandoned to become successful. Carl Jung called it the shadow, all the parts of you that were rejected, dismissed, or ignored. Not just your flaws, but your intuition, your imagination, your chaos, your originality. You were told to leave those behind, to choose order over inner truth, to become presentable. And so you did, but the cost of adaptation is alienation from your deeper self, from your wildness, from your humanity. And it doesn't just affect your inner world. It bleeds into your relationships. You choose partners based on who approves of you, not who truly sees you. You stay in careers that suffocate you because leaving would mean disobedience. You silence your own needs because you were taught that neediness is weakness. You fear judgment more than regret. You fear uncertainty more than inauthenticity. You fear being wrong more than being lost. That's how deep the education goes. And the tragedy? Most people don't even know it happened. Because, like Huxley warned, the cage was made to feel safe. You were entertained, rewarded, applauded, but none of it made you whole. You were shaped to be useful in a system that never asked who you are, only what you can produce. So you build a life with the tools they gave you, and wonder why it feels so hollow. You scroll, you consume. You chase pleasure like it's freedom, but it's not freedom, it's sedation. The modern world is brilliant at keeping you numb. 1,000 dopamine hits a day to distract you from the ache of lost selfhood. But you can't medicate the soul, not with success, not with validation, not with routine. And the longer you ignore it, the louder the emptiness grows, because deep down, you remember. Not consciously, but somewhere in the body, in the quiet moments, in the insomnia, in the sudden anxiety that makes no sense, in the ache that success can't soothe. That's your soul knocking, not because it wants more, but because it wants you, the real you, the untrained you, the version of you that was buried beneath performance and obedience. But here's the danger. If you don't answer that knock, you risk living an entire life of borrowed dreams, of achievements that impress others but mean nothing to you, of relationships that fit the script but star the wrong characters, of decades spent doing everything right and wondering why you still feel wrong. This is the consequence no one warned you about, not burnout, not failure, but the quiet tragedy of never meeting yourself, of being educated out of your own soul. But it's not too late, because what was repressed can be reclaimed. What was trained into you can be unlearned, and what was forgotten can be remembered. But first you must rebel, and that rebellion won't come through rage. It will come through remembering. Let's begin. You don't escape a system like this by running from it. You escape it by seeing it clearly, painfully, truthfully, by daring to peel away the layers of programming and asking one forbidden question. What if everything I was taught to believe about myself wasn't mine? The rebellion begins not with a raised fist, but with a whispered no. No to the path handed to you like a prescription. No to the roles you were trained to play. No to the voice in your head that sounds like you, but speaks in someone else's words. This is the first act of revolution, to pause, to question, to feel, because real freedom isn't a lifestyle upgrade. It's an identity collapse. It's the moment you realize that usefulness isn't the same as worth, that obedience isn't the same as peace, that survival isn't the same as living. But this rebellion comes with risk. It means disappointing others. It means becoming invisible to the system you once pleased. It means turning inward and finding pieces of yourself you are told to abandon. Carl Jung called this the path of individuation. Not self-improvement, not self-optimization, self-realization. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole, reintegrating the wildness you once suppressed, welcoming the parts of yourself that were shamed, silenced, or ignored. The artist, the rebel, the questioner, the dreamer. They were never weaknesses. They were threats to a system that fears souls more than machines. So how do you begin? You start by asking dangerous questions. Not about the world, about yourself. Who am I beneath the persona I created to survive? What do I truly value outside the curriculum of expectations? What would I create, believe, feel if I didn't fear being misunderstood? And then you act, not with violence, but with vision. You write things that were never meant to be graded. You rest without guilt. You create without seeking applause. You speak without rehearsing. You choose without justification. You begin to live as if you are already free, because in that act, freedom becomes real. Michel Foucault once said that freedom is not found outside systems of power, but in becoming conscious of them. When you can see how power shaped your thoughts, your desires, your identity, then you can begin to choose something different. But it won't be comfortable. Freedom rarely is. You will feel untethered. You will lose the certainty that obedience gave you. You will feel the full weight of your choices and the terrifying beauty of being responsible for your own life. But that is the price of awakening. You were trained to need permission. Now you must learn to give it to yourself. You were taught to fear your own instincts. Now you must relearn their language. You were taught that the world will only love the version of you that fits. Now you must dare to be the version that feels. And yes, some people will walk away, but they were walking toward the mask. Let them go. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be real. And there is nothing more powerful than someone who no longer betrays themselves to be acceptable. This is the quiet revolution, the invisible uprising, one awakened mind at a time. Because the system doesn't collapse through protests alone. It collapses when the hearts that feed it go silent, when the gears stop turning, because the souls that powered them remember who they are. And you are not here to be useful. You are here to be whole. That's the shift. That's the rebellion. And the deeper you go, the more you realize something astonishing. You were never broken. You were just buried. And now you rise. You wake up one morning, not to an alarm clock, not to a to-do list, but to a question. A simple, disarming question that pierces the noise. What if I was never meant to be who they told me to be? And in that instant, something shifts. You see your life not as a series of accomplishments, but as a map of abandoned selves. You remember the child who asked, why too much? The teenager who didn't fit in. The adult who began to forget what mattered. You see how every role you played, every mask you wore, wasn't a lie, but a survival. And yet, now you're still here, still breathing, still able to ask, what if I don't need to be useful to be worthy? Because here's the truth they never taught you. You were never just a student, a worker, a citizen. You were a soul temporarily trained to forget its own vastness. You were never meant to be measured, never meant to be standardized, never meant to be fixed. You were meant to become, to unfold, to remember that the system wasn't built to educate you. It was built to extract from you. But what it couldn't take was your essence, your fire, your mystery. And now, that mystery is waking up again. The real education begins now, not in textbooks, not in lectures, but in learning how to live from within, in reclaiming the forgotten parts, in listening to the inner voice, not the inner critic, in trusting what the system taught you to fear, yourself. You are not a machine. You are not a product. You are not here to be consumed by a system that fears depth, silence, and soul. You are a wave in the ocean of consciousness, irreplaceable, predictable, divine. And that's what makes you dangerous. Because a person who knows who they are can no longer be controlled. They no longer need the approval of institutions. They no longer bend to the rhythm of empty ambition. They no longer fear the collapse of the old identity because they've met the one beneath it. And that person? That's the one the world was never ready for. The one who walks away from the game, not in bitterness, but in clarity. The one who sees through the illusion of success. The one who builds not from fear, but from truth. And here's the final paradox. You are always free, even inside the system, even while performing, even while adapting. Freedom isn't given. It's remembered. It's the part of you that refused to die. That kept asking questions when you were told to be quiet. That still dreams in color when the world turned gray. That still believes, despite everything, that there is something sacred about being human. So what now? Now you live, not according to the plan, but according to the pulse of your own soul. You create not because you must, but because you can. You learn not to compete, but to expand. You speak not to impress, but to reveal. You walk not toward validation, but toward inner union. You realize that you were never behind. You were only misled. And now you return to yourself, to the forgotten fire, to the untamed self they tried to educate out of you. Not to burn the world, but to light your path. And as you walk it, others will notice, not your achievements, not your titles, but your presence. They'll feel it, the quiet power of someone who no longer lives as a prisoner of praise. And some will follow, because nothing is more contagious than a liberated soul. This is the ultimate truth. You are not educated to be free, but freedom was always possible, because no system can kill a soul that dares to remember itself. So ask yourself, not what should I do, but who am I when I no longer need to be useful? Because the answer to that question is where your real life begins.